Indigenous rights have become an increasingly important issue at the international stage. With more than 370 million indigenous peoples spread across the world, these rights are being recognized and defined in international law and policy. Indigenous rights are rights or freedoms that are recognized and protected by international law for indigenous peoples, particularly those who have been historically disadvantaged and marginalized. These rights include the right to self-determination, the right to culture, the right to land and resources, the right to education, the right to health, the right to political participation, the right to free, prior and informed consent, and the right to be free from discrimination. In recent years, there has been a growing focus on indigenous rights at the international level. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UNDRIP, is a major step in recognizing and protecting indigenous rights around the world. The UNDRIP is a non-binding document that was adopted in 2007 and is considered a major milestone in the development of indigenous rights. It outlines the individual and collective rights of indigenous peoples, including the rights to self-determination, to culture, to land and resources, to education, and to political participation. In addition to UNDRIP, other international instruments have been adopted to recognize and protect indigenous rights. The International Labour Organization, ILO, Convention 169 is a binding legal instrument that sets out the minimum standards for the protection of indigenous peoples. It outlines the rights to land, to free, prior and informed consent, and to cultural identity. It also recognizes the right of indigenous peoples to be involved in decision-making that affects them. The International Court of Justice has also played a role in upholding indigenous rights. In 2018, the court ruled in favor of the indigenous peoples of the Awas-Tingni community in Nicaragua, finding that the government had violated their right to their land and resources. This ruling set an important precedent for the recognition of indigenous rights around the world. As indigenous rights become increasingly recognized, states have begun to develop laws and policies that protect and promote these rights. Many countries have passed legislation to recognize and protect the rights of indigenous peoples. For example, in Canada, the government has adopted the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as part of its own laws and policies. This has resulted in a number of positive changes, including the recognition of indigenous languages, the protection of sacred sites, and the implementation of free, prior and informed consent. Ultimately, the recognition and protection of indigenous rights is a critical step in ensuring that indigenous peoples are able to live freely and with dignity. This is an essential part of creating a more just and equitable world. As more countries recognize and protect indigenous rights, it is essential that the international community continues to ensure that these rights are upheld and respected.